Our next speaker requires really no introduction, and apparently he's not getting one. My name is Gary Bergquist, in case you don't know. There are a couple things I need to say to start out. The first is that anything that I say during this session represents the opinions of Gary Bergquist, and Gary Bergquist alone, not of Dyalog necessarily, or of anyone in this room, or of anyone on this planet, okay? Second thing I need to say is that I love APL. Now, it sounds like a silly thing to say because we're in an APL conference and everybody here loves APL, but when I say that I love APL, I mean that I love APL. I mean that it makes my knees weak. I think about it at night when I'm going to sleep. I think about it in the morning when I wake up. It has made a commitment to me, and I to it. I love APL. So because of this, I find it rather disturbing when people come up to me. Well, one thing you need to know, because you're probably wondering about what my wife thinks about this. And we've been married for many years, and she understands it. She understands that in my life's priorities, she's in the top 2, which is good. So when someone comes up to me and they say to me, "You're still using APL?" And people have been saying this to me for years and years, and probably to all of you. No kidding, you still use APL. And to me, it's like saying...
It still exists?
It's like saying, "You're still married?" Or they say, "APL, isn't that a dead language?" They're saying, "Your wife, is she still alive?" You know, I find it offensive that people talk in this fashion. And it's especially troubling to me because of the feelings that I have towards APL. And one of the things I want to go through today is I want to talk about APL and about whether or not it has a future. I'd like to think that it does, and that I have a future with APL. In order to answer the question of whether or not APL has a future, we really have to understand what it is that we mean by APL. What is it about APL that makes it special, makes it different from other languages? We asked a group of young people yesterday, and some of them said, well, it's the debugger. Ooh, I love that debugger. Maybe it's immediate execution mode, the ability to take APL and hold it in your hands. You know, it's the conciseness. Maybe it's the mathematical abstractness of it, the consistency, the fact that everything goes right to left, every function takes as its argument everything to the right of it. Maybe it's arrays. People keep saying arrays. We should be working with other array languages. Arrays, that's the thing that makes APL. All of these things make APL, but I don't think any one of them really defines what we mean by APL. The question that we have to answer here is, what is the point of APL? What is it about APL that really distinguishes itself? Once we've defined that, then we can answer questions like, well, is J APL, or is it not APL? Do we have an answer to that question? Other languages, are they becoming more and more like APL? Are they APL? What is APL? In order to understand the future of APL, we have to understand what we really mean by APL. Now, speaking of J, let me ask a question that has to do with Ken Iverson. This is a simple yes-no question. Show of hands. Who here believes that Ken Iverson invented APL? So, now this is a yes-no, right? All right, so about 2/3. 1/3 of you think that he did not. All right, interesting, interesting. All right, who here thinks that Ken Iverson discovered APL? Nope. Oh. Well, okay, now if we understand APL, we should be able to answer this question. What is it? Did he invent APL or did he discover it? Edison invented the light bulb. What does that mean? It means that it wasn't there, and he invented it. Christopher Columbus maybe discovered America. Well, what does that mean? It means it was there and he found it. So did Iverson find it, or did he discover it? Was it there or not? Is APL there? Is APL something that's part of the fabric of the universe? You know, is it like the Pythagorean theorem, or like calculus, or like the area of a circle, or prime numbers? If you were to go off into outer space, find some extraterrestrial intelligence, would they have APL? Is it inevitable that you will find APL? Is it there and Iverson merely discovered it? Or is it not there and he invented it? I think it's important to know. Now, my opinion on this, and I've thought about it a lot, is I think that he discovered it. I think that it's here in this room, but I think that when all of us leave, I think it leaves with us. I think that APL is not like the Rosetta Stone. It's not carved in subatomic particles or somewhere in the fabric of the universe. I think that APL is here. I think that if you're looking at what APL is, you're defining what it is. If you're asking yourself, would this be an extension of APL? You need to look here. You need to look into your own mind. So APL exists in the mind of the beholder. And we've heard this expression, APL is a tool of thought, but the question is of whose thoughts? And I think the simple answer to that is it's the thought of the APLer. Now, APLer, we're all APLers. That seems obvious. Nothing is obvious. I think you can, speaking of scientists and the universe and subatomic particles, scientists tend to take subatomic particles, spin them around a track, smack them into one another in order to learn more, in order to learn about the universe. What did the universe look like at the moment of conception? You know, what did it look like? That answers so many questions. And I think when we're trying to determine what APL is, we can do the same thing. What I would call the APL Big Bang Theory. The idea here is that we look where APL exists, which is here in our minds, and we say, what is APL? And all we need to do is go back to the moment it began. And the moment it began was the moment in our own minds when we went, ooh. When I fell in love. You have to ask yourself what that moment was. For me, it was this. I still get weak in the knees when I see it. It means so much to me. When I first saw this expression, I had done some programming in other languages, and I knew you could compute the average of a set of numbers. All you had to do was some input expressions to bring the values into a variable, had to define the variable, had to declare it, had to say what its data type was, go through a bit of a loop, a do while, or whatever it's called, and then do some output expressions, and boom, you had an average. It was simple. And then I saw this, and I smiled. And at the moment of your own APL Big Bang, you must have smiled. Because that's what it's all about. APL is about seeing this and going, ooh, that feels good. Now, if it only I knew that at that moment I should write it down. I should write down what it was that defined APL, that made APL different. I should have written it down, but I didn't. You didn't either. Because the next thing was, well, this is how you get a matrix. And this is how you index from, you can transpose things. And you went, ooh, 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 ooh. And it was all nice, but you lost the moment when you knew what APL was. And let me tell you, it's not arrays, and it's not a nice debugger, and it's not best calculator mode. I mean, yes, it's all of those things, and it's the symbols, but it's not. It's just one thing. There's one thing. The thing that makes that expression make me go, ooh, when I think about other languages. I've tried to figure out the wording for it, and this is the best I can come up with. It is a promise to you as programmers that a notation of direct abstraction is possible. It's a promise that it is always possible to have a direct connection between what the problem is and how you can express the solution as a notation. This is fancy words. You might prefer this. This is the point of APL. Skip the fluff. Keep it simple. Cut the crap. It's a one-to-one note. It's one-to-one between the view of the algorithm and the actual statement, the notation that expresses that. Don't waste my time. Trim the fat. I don't care how you choose to view it, but this is what APL is. This is the definition of APL. This is what makes APL different from other languages. Now, so is J APL? Well, actually it is. I mean, it's the same philosophy. It's the same idea that there's this one-to-one, that we're trimming the fat. So the disturbing thing, I think, is, all right, if this is so good, if this promises us this wonderful ability to write programs rapidly and to be so much better than other languages which don't trim the fat. You know, sometimes you say, well, this language is getting better. It's got these features of APL. All that really matters is Does it eliminate all the stuff you don't really need to know? And if it does, it is APL, regardless of what the notation happens to be. But why do other languages still exist? How can they? You know, after all these years, they should be gone. But they're not. There's some comfort in that. You know, if COBOL never dies, then nothing will ever die, and APL will never die, and I'll always have a job. But that's minor comfort. The question is, why hasn't APL gone nuts? I think to answer this, you have to look at the APL food chain. You have to follow the money, as in politics, as in business, as in anything. You have to follow the money. Out there in the real world, APL is being used. The money always starts with the consumer. The consumer has the money. She wants to buy something. She goes to the business. The business provides the product to the consumer. The business needs to administer the business. So the business goes to what you people have been calling the domain expert. I like to view it as the industry software expert, but it's the same thing. They go to the domain expert, who turns to the APLer, who can program so rapidly, so elegantly, that it makes angels weep. The APLer, in turn, turns to the wizard, the utility wizard, for help in being even more productive, for being able to solve the needs of the domain expert and the client as rapidly as possible. The utility wizard turns to Dyalog for all of the tools, the .NET, the quad this and the quad that, all of the power, all of the primitives necessary to be able to build the software necessary to work its way up the chain, to bring in the money. The APL Interpreter Developer, Dyalog, turns to Microsoft, who reports to no one but God and Bill Gates. So if we look at this APL food chain, we notice that, of course, the APLer is at the center of the universe, as it should be. The money flows from the top down, and this APL food chain, like any chain, is only as strong as its weakest link, but if everything is flowing, the money is flowing, and everybody is happy. One thing you'll need to notice about this chain is that in each point, you're in there somewhere. Sometimes you wear multiple hats, possibly. But the healthy chain has all of these ingredients, and at each point, the individual at that point is intimately familiar with the one above and the one below. The domain expert, for example, knows the business very well and knows the APLer. The APLer knows the domain expert and knows the utility wizard. The utility wizard knows the Dyalog and what they can provide, knows the APLer, and so on. When you get beyond that, beyond one link, it starts to get a little bit weak. The APLer really doesn't know a lot about the consumer, knows somewhat about the business. All right, now, you may look at this and say, well, yeah, it's possible. That's a reasonable explanation about how things work, but I don't really buy it. You know, I think that this thing about the utility wizard looks a little bit odd. I mean, I'm an APLer. I'm not a utility wizard, and I don't think that you really need one. My experience is that that is not the case. The utility wizard, who you may think is invisible, is really there. I find it interesting at these conferences that everybody here says, I am an APLer. I don't agree with that. I think that you are the wizards. And I think the APLers are back in the office actually doing the job. I left my 4 APLers back there, and they're doing the work. Now, I wear the hat sometimes of the APLer when my job is to satisfy the client. The phones are ringing. I'm writing the software, and all I want to do is get it done as quickly as possible so I can watch television. That's my job. I want to cut the crap, eliminate the fluff. I want to live by the promise that a notation of abstract, a direct notation of abstract is I want that. Okay? But you may not agree. I don't buy it. We don't have a utility wizard. And we don't need one. We do just fine. Which is okay. You don't have to agree with me on that. Although there's something about that rings a bell that sounds familiar to me. Ah, that's what it is. I think that we need to look at utilities the way we've always looked at primitive APL. Primitive APL is the first gear in the APL machine. We have a certain degree of productivity we get out of it, but you don't fulfill the promise of APL until you move up to the second gear, utilities. And those utilities have to fulfill that same promise. That is that there will be no fluff. If the utility is good, it has no fluff. And as far as the APLer is concerned, they don't care that it's primitive APL they're writing or it's writing with utility functions. As long as they can do it as directly and quickly as possible, they're happy. What I'm going to do now is take a little bit of a detour. I'm going to show you some utilities. You know utilities. We're all wizards. I'm going to do this because I want to reinforce for you, in case you've forgotten, that utilities can be as free of fluff as primitive APL. Remember while we do this, a notation of direct abstraction is possible. Trim the fat. We're trying to illustrate that utilities can trim the fat as well as any APL can. So, in my opinion, the first gear of APL is primitives. The second gear is utilities built upon those primitives. The third gear is, of course, utilities built upon those utilities. And on it goes, on it goes. Any company that I've ever seen that is very effective at using APL has a utility wizard that is providing these utilities to make the APLers all the more productive. Some examples. These are Mickey Mouse. They're not in here intending to show what kind of utilities Gary writes that are nice. They're just like the utilities you have. What I'm trying to show you is there's no fat. No fat, so you can be productive. Now, you might look at this as an APL and say, how do I solve this problem? I can take the data, I can run it through in code. I can strip off using, residue or whatever and subtract and add this and compare the dates. Yes, you can do that. That's true. But you can use utilities to do it as well. Actuaries have different ways of determining somebody's age. Age last is the way that normal humans do it. Suppose you have two dates, and we want to determine how many days there have been between this date and this date. Well, again, you can look at it from an APL perspective, or you can just say this is a date subtraction problem, use a utility. Suppose you have this date and you want to know what the date's going to be in 90 days or in 180 days or in 360 days. That's a date addition problem. So all you need is a utility that does it. Obvious, simple, direct. Suppose we want to take these dates and format them in a particular format. Okay, you can use quad FMT, you can use the G format, blah, blah. Sure, you can do that fast. But the APLer wants to do it faster still, wants to do it as rapidly as possible with as little fluff as possible. All right, how about this? Compute the average of a set of numbers. Well, that's obvious. That would be the, I fooled you. I'm not abandoning APL, primitive APL. This is the way an APLer would do it. It's direct, it's quick, it's simple. There's no fluff in that. I mean, yes, you could use MEAN or AVG. You can do that if you want to. It doesn't really matter. The idea is do it fast, do it direct. You can read it quickly. 80% of the time that APLers spend in their lives is spent on maintaining existing code. Client calls, can you change this? Can you change this? We're not always writing new things. You need to be able to open a program and see it, and if it's direct, if there's a one-to-one correspondence between what the client's saying and your view of the problem and the code, you can immediately make the change. But if it's filled with fluff, then it's slower, and that costs me time and it costs me money. Etc., etc. You use these utilities. You all use something that looks, just looking at the names, you can probably guess half of them. The other half, maybe you can't, because I've used different wording that you have. And you have your own set. I picked these out. I didn't pick out some that I was certain you'd have no idea what they do. If you'd like, you can pick one of them out, put it in your mind, and you can ask me later what it does. But probably it does something that you're doing. Let's look at some that are a little more. Those are kindergarten examples, all right? Let's move up a level. Let's move up to how we can be more productive. We might categorize utilities in these different ways. I'm going to show you some examples from each of them. File handling. Okay, this is not just a two-line function anymore. We have a file. Given a comma-delimited file, we want to take it, we want to bring it in, we want to chunk it up and get the data in APL variables. So the file looks like this, a comma-delimited file. All right, we can quad N tie it, we can quad N read it. We've got to do some error trapping to make sure that we can in fact tie the file, that we can read it, that there's commas in there. We've got to look for new lines and line feeds, and we've got to make sure they didn't leave any commas out. And if there's double quotes, we've got to make sure that we use not equal scan or whatever efficient technique to read the thing in and bring all the stuff in. Blah, 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 blah. And it's fun to do that. I mean, I agree, it's fun to do that, but there's no need to do that. That's fluff. This quad anything is fluff. This isn't sacrilege, okay? The wizards believe in quad this and that. But I'm not talking about the wizards. I'm talking about the APLers. The APLers don't want to know about quad and read. The APLers want to use the utility function. Utility function here is on line 7. Read file. Left argument, file name. There's one header record. Right argument, definitions of the fields. There are the fields. Field 1, 2, 3. We don't care about field 4, 5, and 6. This shows you the type of the field, a little descriptive name for the field in case it has to return an error message saying that a certain field was missing or whatever. And we get back the data or an error message. We check for an error message and we display it if there's something wrong. Otherwise, boom, there it is. That's all there is. You go back. There's the specification of the problem. There's a solution for the problem. There's a one-to-one. There's no fluff here. You might disagree with the details of this particular utility. Maybe you have one that works a little bit better. That's fine. But the point is, there's no crap. There's just what you need to do. Take the problem, change it a little bit. Make it a fixed record length problem. Now the file is described in this fashion, but it's the same problem. It's a different kind of file. You still got to quad and read, and you got to do this to convert it into matrices and try to convert all these things with delta VFI. Delta VFI has no place here, not for the APL, or it has a place for the wizard who's writing this utility, and the solution ends up being about the same. On line 7, there's a read file, same function. There's the definition of the fields, name of the file, check, make sure everything works fine, okay. File handling. All right, now that we've got these variables we sucked out of this file, let's save them in a file. There doesn't need to be a lot of quad ftie or, you know, let's just have some simple, and you've got these yourself, fget, fput utilities. Sum the premiums by the number of policies by the year of birth. Okay, we've got a vector of dates, and we've got to pick off the year portion of those. We've got to determine the distinct years that we have, and we have to accumulate by year. Boop, boop, boop. That's all there is to it. If you're using the appropriate utility functions, you have code that's very direct, very directly associated with the problem, so you can change it rapidly. All right, now let's generate a report. Report will look like this. We've got titles, column headings, data lying under it. Things are kind of centered. This would be fun as an APL problem to try to do it, get it all just right. A little center routine perhaps and all this kind of stuff. But we do it all the time. It's a waste of time. We need utilities to allow us to do it more quickly. So in this case, the utility is on line 10. It's called ZW out. And to the left are the widths and the titles and the headings and the body. And we've defined the titles and the heading and the body. We've even used quad FMT. Have nothing against primitive APL where it's appropriate. Quad FMT does the job just fine. We don't really need a utility. There it is. If I need to change this report, if somebody says to me, well, can you change that number of policies to a policy frequency or something? It's very easy to go in there, immediately find out where it is on line 7, make the change. Boom, done. We have made a promise to APLers to provide the ability to code as directly and quickly as possible. All right, now take this report and build it as a Word file. It starts the same. We get to our ZW out, but instead of returning it as a report that went to the screen, by the way, that last thing went to the screen. This one is explicitly returned. We pass it to a utility function on line 12, which builds the RTF code that we can then append to a file so that we have a Word document. And the appending to the file and making sure you can create such a file and so on is done on line 13. Build it as an Excel file. I love this one. I like this because this is a bad example. I put it in there because I couldn't just show you the obvious. You look at the obvious and say, well, of course, of course, of course. I also want to show you something that's bad. I mean, this is a bad utility. What we're doing here is we're building an Excel file. And the utility is being used as XL, and you see it used all over the place. I just want to talk about, real quickly, what's wrong with this thing if it's not already obvious. You can tell bad utilities, utilities that aren't APL. That's the best way to put it, okay? APL is cut the crap. We have fluff in here, and the fluff is due to two things. There's two ways you see this. One is you'll see the guts from what's going on inside. Anytime you see the guts, that's a mistake. The guts show themselves on line 15. Negative 4108, of course. You use negative 4108 when you want to center something. That makes a lot of sense. And then on line 23, you want to do formatting? Well, pound, this, that, pound. If you get the pounds wrong, I don't know what might happen. This is showing what Excel, it's reflecting Excel's pains. The other thing that's wrong, the other type of problem here is that it's It's got extra stuff. It's redundant. For example, on line 10, we're setting column widths. The column widths are set to 8, 15, and 15. Oh, and by the way, 1, 1, 1, 3. Start at row 1, column 1, for 1 row and 3 columns. What a stupid thing that is to say. I'm really setting the column width for all of the rows, but that's just the syntax of that. And why do I need to set the column width? Shouldn't it be smart enough when I build a report that it can do it on its own? Why am I centering? Doesn't it know? I'm putting in titles. Doesn't it know? Why do I have to build a sheet on line 9? Doesn't it know? And at the end it closes it. Why? I mean, I'm telling it all of these obvious things. Now, sure, it's only 21 lines. And that's nice. You know, I can do a lot in APL in 21 lines. I built a whole Excel spreadsheet and put a report out there. I should feel proud. I'm not. I'm ashamed. It's not a good example of a utility function. I violated what it is the APLer is expecting from me. But let's suppose I built this Excel file. We now want to send it off to Fred in accounting, so we need something for sending email. All right, this one's not bad. We've got a utility function on line 8. Send out this email. There's the message, the subject, the to, the from, just the minimum of what you need to send. There's the tie numbers of the file. Boom, there it goes. Does it work? We've got to do a little checking at the end to see if it works. There's no quad functions in there. There's no mention of conga or no mention of TCP/IP. Yes, that's in there. The wizards are concerned about it in SMTP, but as an APLer, I don't want to hear it. All right, how about some GUI? We've got a menu here. Present a menu of choices from which you want to pick one. Come on. All you need to tell it is, well, what do you want for a title bar, and what are the choices? The 0 says I'm only expecting one choice, and if that choice is the third choice, then I'll provide a 3 instead of a 0. If the default choice is the third choice. 0 means I don't want any of them highlighted. Suppose I want to allow multiple choices. Well, then we just turn that 0 into a zildia vector. Vector says, all right, multiple choices. And if I want to specify which ones are initially highlighted, I give it a vector of those initial choices. Suppose you have a menu of one of these add-remove menus, all right? I've got, these are all my choices on the left. You click which ones you want. You say, all right, add those, remove those, that sort of thing. It shouldn't be any more complicated than that. I don't want to have to be defining forms and so on. It should be a simple utility function. Suppose you've got this, a list of choices, and you want to just alter their order. This is an up-down kind of a problem. It shouldn't be any more complicated than that. This is APL. And we should all be using these APL utilities, not these. But it should be part of the language. We want to use different ones, that's fine, but we're wasting our time by all developing the same ones. This is my last example. We're done with utilities after this. This one says, present the following input form. And the form's got policy form as its title, and it's got a bunch of fields on the left. Policy number is actually not a number. It can contain characters. The name is a character. Vector. Contract date is 8 to 8. Should be a date. Frequency, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, annual. Upper right-hand corner, check boxes, qualified, tax exempt, Boolean fields, yes or no. Tax rate, a numeric field. And below that, sex, male or female, radial buttons. Which do you want, one or the other, 1 or 2? Some buttons at the bottom, that's what the form is. Now, I've described it for you pretty quickly. The idea that you would now have to tell the APL programmer, well, you're going to have to now go into a thing and build something, and maybe you're using quad things, or maybe, you know, it's got to be as quickly as I just described it. And I've got a solution on the next foil that is 16 lines. I'm going to pause just a second, because it took me 16 years to write these 16 lines. It took me the first 10 years to develop what I might call the second gear. This is the third gear. This is built upon that. And you're going to look at it, it's just like plus/v divided by rho v. You look at it and say, of course. Any idiot would know that. I mean, it's obvious when you see it. It's just this, said in English, if you will, said in simple APL. So on the first line, we say these are the choices of the frequencies that we have. Then the next couple lines, these are the default values we're going to be showing on this form. Okay, on line 7, so, all right, we're going to have a character field, character PN. We'll even give it a name in case you need to reference it for something. The default value is Paul No, and the label is policy number. It's kind of obvious, you know, character name, name, size. I had to say the size of the field because it was a little narrow, so I had to specify size 25, make it a little bit wider than the default might have been. Date, contract date, frequency, FR from line 1, the options of the types of frequencies. Go back here so you see what I'm talking about. That drop-down field frequency has the various available choices, of which monthly is the default value, which we can see up there under freq on line 4. And we take all of those on line 11 and we put them into a vertical group, and then we do the same thing for the next ones. There's our checkboxes. Qual and exempt are the default values. Quote, quote, if you want, you could say it's a label of a frame that you might put these little checkboxes in, but otherwise, if you just want the checkboxes there's the names of the checkboxes, tax rate, the default value is rate, sex, male, female. If you don't say the style, they'll be one over the other, male, female. But that seems sexist. Wanted them side by side. So instead, style horizontal, and put that as a vertical group, put the two vertical groups into a horizontal group, that's it. And the utility function is called askInfo. Must be a simple function, right? 5-liner. There's a lot to that function, but the APLer doesn't care. Those lines produce that form. The result of askInfo is the data, which gets assigned, as long as they didn't press the escape key, gets assigned to these variables. That's all there is to it, one-to-one. This is APL. I don't care how you do it, as long as you do it in the same number of lines. That's all there is to it. And you owe it to your APLers to provide code that's this concise. And you can only do it when you are willing to move to the next gear, move to the second gear, which is all about utilities. Where have we gone wrong? Why is it that we haven't taken over the world? And I think it has to do with the APL food chain. If you look at the structure, it's close to working real smoothly, but it's not quite right. And the problem has to do with these. How am I doing on time? All right. It has to do with these that I've highlighted. First of all, the APLer and the utility wizard work in the same company. They also work in there with a domain expert. Probably those three are together. The APL Interpreter Development Dyalog works at a different company. What is motivating these people? The APLer is sitting there in front of the machine trying to get out the code as fast as he can to keep the customer satisfied, to keep the money coming in. That's his job. The utility wizard is trying to keep supply, trying to make as productive as possible the APLer. The utility wizard knows the APLer, and he knows Dyalog. Knows them, and Dyalog's helping the utility wizard put together these utilities to help the APLer. But that utility wizard does not care at all about other wizards. They're in other companies. Doesn't know them, except at these conferences. Doesn't care about them. But without them working together, everyone's building the same thing over and over. So that full screen stuff that I showed you, that askInfo, we're all using an askInfo, right? No, I haven't shared it with anybody. Sure, I mean, I'll offer it to you, but you all have your own things. You all build your own things separately, and it's what you should do. It's the way you're motivated. It's the way you're paid. But if we're to move ahead, if we're to say, second gear is where it's at, we need to come together to build second gear. We can do that without changing things much. Let's look at the APL Interpreter Developer Dyalog. What are they doing? Their job traditionally has been to provide APL. And APL traditionally has been Gear 1 APL. It's been primitives. So they provide primitives. They do a great job. But they have a fatal flaw, a fundamental weakness, which is they're 2 levels removed from the APLer. So even if they want to give you Gear 2, and they may think they can give you Gear 2, they're 2 levels removed from it. The wizard knows, you know what your APLer wants and needs. They have an idea. They think they know. They may be able to produce something that's pretty good, but you're the ones that really know. All they need to do is to tap you, to organize you, to bring you together. So if the APL Interpreter Developer Dyalog is able to look at itself as a librarian. A librarian does not write books. A librarian brings together the books. Maybe a better analogy is a conductor. All right? A composer writes music, but a conductor brings it together. Dyalog needs to be the conductor that brings us together. They need to know that the way to make money, they sell APL. And APL is not Gear 1 APL anymore. It's Gear 1, Gear 2 utilities. They need to sell. They want to sell. They'll make money by selling a product that has not only Gear 1, but superior utilities that make you all the more productive, that they explain and document as well as they do the primitives. In order to do that, they need them. But they're 2 steps removed. So they can't produce them, but they can produce them because they have access to you. So if they can corral you, can conduct you, can bring you together, what are you working on? What kind of utilities are you working on? Sharing the knowledge, making sure that the wizards are all producing utilities that can help everybody else. Utility wizards are only too happy to share with other wizards. They want anything. Their job is to make money and to get that APL productive. So they want to work with everyone else, but they can't. It's the job of Dyalog, if they want to enhance their offering with better utilities, to coordinate us, to coordinate the wizards, so that we can all work together, produce utilities that we give to Dyalog, that they sell, making money from us, and we're all making money, and we're all delighted. So we need this Gear 2 mindset. The utilities we have to come up with, but we have to slightly change how we're doing it. So the APL Interpreter Developer Dyalog needs to coordinate wizard communication, allow us to share what we're doing, what we're working on. Play the librarian, not the author. It's part of their product. They get what we do, and we're only too happy to give it to them. But they have to acknowledge that we know the APL are just a little better than they do. Okay? Nothing against, And they document and distribute and sell both gears, because APL is not the primitives. APL is a promise that a notation of direct abstraction is possible. It's a promise that we will eliminate the fluff. The utility wizard has the job of working with the APLer, communicating with other wizards through the coordination of Dyalog and developing the utilities. And it's the job of the APLer to provide feedback to the wizard. This is good, this sucks. This is good, this sucks. I like this. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do this over and over and over again? Make it better. And it's the job of the APLer to write APL. And that, in my opinion, is the future of APL. Embrace the second gear, the utility level, on top of the primitive level. Any questions? No questions.